Clive Beggs, please enter the floor. He is a professor of applied physiology from Leeds Beckett University, and he will talk about air filtration on hospital wards and COVID. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Hello. Well, thank you for inviting me here. I'm going to say absolutely nothing about physiology here, but I am going to talk about a trial that we've got, really a clinical study that we've got going on at Addenbrooke's that I've been involved with in Cambridge. And I want to, first of all, thank and acknowledge the rest of the team at Addenbrooke's and who are involved in the ARDS research study that we've got going on here. And I'd like to say a little bit about this study. Kath Noakes mentioned it this morning, just in passing in one of her slides. This is it's a kind of microbiological and epidemiological control study that we're running on 2 elderly care wards at Addenbrooke's Hospital. And it's a 12-month study, and it's coming to its end. I was part of the team that designed it, procured the funding, and also really have managed it. But I'm blinded to the results, right? Blinded to the clinical results. What makes it extremely interesting is that it's the first study of its kind in an elderly care setting, but probably also in any clinical setting, to look at both the epidemiology, the patient data, and the microbiological data with HEPA filters. And so we put HEPA filters in the 2 wards. And what makes it even more interesting is this is the kind of study that I was kind of hoping to do for years, and then COVID came along and someone actually thought it was important to do. So we were able to look not only at SARS-CoV-2 and other viral pathogens, but we're also looking at bacterial pathogens like C. diff, MRSA, Acinetobacter, and some fungal pathogens as well. So we're really going to town on this one. And we've got 2 very simple research questions, but these are really important research questions that, if we can get insights into them, will have far-reaching consequences. So the first one is, does the HEPA filters, or have the HEPA filters made any difference to the infection rates and to the microbiome of these wards? And secondly, if it has, what does this tell us about the aerial transmission, airborne transmission, aerial dissemination of pathogens, and their link to nosocomial infection in hospitals? I should say that I firmly believe these are very immobile patients, so they're not getting up and walking around the ward. They're in their beds, and they're poorly. And so there's not many routes for infection to be transmitted other by the staff or by aerosols. And we wanted, when we designed the study, we wanted to just hit everything, look at every infection. So we fully expect some infections to be to have an impact on some routes of infection and not others. So we're looking at, for example, urinary tract infections as one of those. I'll be really surprised if it has an effect on it. If it does, then we need to rewrite the textbooks, basically, right? But we're doing a thorough job. Early in the study, last year, we were commissioning these units, these air filtration units, and they were put in the ward, as you'll see in a minute, and someone turned one of the units off for 7 hours, approximately, on the 3rd of August last year. Now, we had a whole load of sensors in this ward. As you'll see, there's 7 sensors, all sensing particulate matter in the air, CO2, temperature, and relative humidity. They were all running through the period when the thing was turned off. Then someone realized, oh, it's turned off, let's put it back on again. But we had real-time time series data. And when I saw this, I thought, this is gold dust. We've got to write this up. This is a natural experiment. Little did I know that just to get these 2 days, the 3rd and 4th, it would be over 3,000 data points and about 4 months of my time. But we wrote it up, and here's the preprint. We're writing it up for a clinical journal paper at the moment. So you can go and find it. It's in medRxiv at the moment. Look, this has given us very valuable insights. It's the first time series study ever done in the world, really, this, about particulate movement of particulate matter around wards and the link with human activity, and also the impact of the air filtration units on the aerosol burden in the wards. So, this rather strange symbol here is the air filtration units, right, which is here. And it's in the communal area off the corridor in the ward space. These are all sensors at various points. Sensor A is right next to the unit, by the way. These bays are positively pressurized, so there's air being blown in here by a mechanical system through to the corridor. It's negative where it's extracted there. We've also got openable windows. Right? Remember, this was an unforeseen natural experiment. So we don't know the ventilation rate on the day in the ward, but what we know from historical measurements, they're around about a medium of 4 air changes per hour on that ward space. There's the units. They're made by Air Purity UK, who I've got no other than one of the authors, Darren Sleuth, on the first author on that paper, was very helpful and has put a lot of time and effort into this. But these have got HEPA filters in here, and there's also a UV lamp at 254 nanometers, ostensibly to clean the filters, but they're essentially filtered machines. And when they're on the kind of standard speed setting, it's 3,000 meter cube per hour, just to give you an idea. They're quite big beasts. And here it is in the communal area. And they blow the air around here. Again, very much a laminar flow. Right, I do a lot of machine learning as well as other things that I do. And one of the things I wanted to do here was be rigorous about this. So I did basically what's called change point analysis on the data, because we wanted to not look at any kind of a priori, make a priori decisions. So we wanted to keep those to a minimum. So we looked at the signal. This is the signal from sensor A, and you can see these are the particulates PM1 size. And we saw some change points here at CP1, CP2, CP3, CP4, and CP5. And this one coincided exactly with when the unit was turned off. So the unit's on here. As soon as we turn the unit off, suddenly the particulates in the ward increase dramatically. And then they fluctuate according to the occupancy levels. When the unit was, that was at 8:15 in the morning. When the unit was again turned on, there's an instant reduction. That was at 3:30 in the afternoon. There was another change here. We suspect at the end of the shift. We don't know, right? Later on in the day. And then through the night, it was on a night setback of setting 2. And in the morning, it came on at 9 o'clock in the next morning down to setting 3. And you see another shift down. So the unit's all the way operating here, whereas it's off at that point there. And these were all statistically significant changes. So what were we actually sampling in the space with the sensors? We were taking these sensors were going at every tenth of a minute, so 10 samples per minute. So we had PM1, PM2.5, PM4, PM10, CO2, temperature and relative humidity. And because relative humidity is a very, very treacherous measurement, because it's actually relative and it's a function of temperature amongst other things, we converted this to absolute vapor pressure, right, which is an absolute value. Anyway, when putting this slideshow together, it was a question of how do we put so much information all together. So this is a really interesting slide. So the point to mention is that this is where the unit's off, between there and there, right? This is the PM1, PM2.5, PM4, PM10. And so we see instantly that when the unit was on, when the filtration unit was on, throughout the ward, for all the sizes, we see a great reduction in the particulate levels in the air. And when we compared it with the next day, this was dramatically smaller. In fact, the p-value was less than 0.001. So in other words, statistically, the air filtration unit was having a big effect. The next thing to notice is that when the unit was off, the particles were occurring, peaking there, and then traveling around the ward. They were moving through the air, migrating through the spaces on the ward. And not only that, that's for all the sizes. They were being picked up by the sensors. So this one here peaked there at wherever sensor F is, and then went to there, and you can see it happening through the ward, and then you can see it again happening in the afternoon. But also, this was the same thing happening for all the particle sizes. Right? The next day, when the unit was running, there was a lot less. The particles counts were much smaller, but there was still a spike at that point there. Again, this was clear indication with strong correlations, all significant, strongly significant, that there was migration of particles freely going through the ward. Now, if we look at CO2, and I've just compared it with the PM1 here, you can see that instantly the CO2 is a very good surrogate for activity on the ward. And you can see the strong correlations between the activity and the particulates there. And you can see the spike here was related to the CO2 there, spike that occurred in the afternoon that day. What's very interesting, however, is that, and we still don't understand it, is that the filtration unit shouldn't have affected the CO2, but it did. We saw lower levels. Obviously, this is nighttime, but we saw lower levels there. It instantly dropped. And what we think might have been happening was that we got a lot more movement of air around the ward, and it was entraining more air through windows that were open. We still don't understand that. But there were very strong correlations, as you can see. I took the opportunity because I wanted to explore the vapor pressure more. And so I actually got some metadata for the same day, 2 days from Cambridge, and computed the outside vapor pressure, which is this purple line, and the indoor vapor pressure from the temperature and humidity. And when I took the one from the other, you get this line here, the added vapor pressure in the space, which is, you can see how closely that's related to the carbon dioxide levels and the activity. And you can see that's the correlation there, 0.8. So we've got another indicator. This is all saying that these particles are being generated internally in the space through human activity. And we potentially, actually, I went on further, it's not here, we actually built some linear models and were able to predict from these environmental indicators the actual particulate levels, which I thought was extremely interesting, but I didn't know what to do with it. Right? So, what can we say we know from this, and what can we say we don't know from this? Well, we can say with great confidence that the aerosols were being liberated into the space by human activity. That's respiration, talking, shedding of skin scramia, making of beds, various other things. The particulate matter, the aerosols, were freely migrating throughout the whole of the ward, all the subcompartments. So they were traveling much more than 2 meters. The air filtration unit greatly reduced the levels of particulate matter in the space. And we can infer from this, because we know the viral load will be in those smaller particles, that probably the viral load was reduced by the air filtration units. What we don't know, however, from this is the proportion of the airborne particulate matter was respiratory aerosols. And we don't know the viral load that was in that particulate matter. We can't tell from this, but we can start to make some guesses. And when I say guesses, I mean educated guesses, right? And this really goes into what Stephanie was saying this morning. So I'm hopefully going to answer one of her questions about study after study, and Andy Conway Morris, who's on our team as well at Addenbrooke's, found the same thing. We find viral particles in the smaller aerosols, right? That's where we find them, the SARS-CoV-2. I think it also goes for influenza. Correct me if I'm wrong later. I apologize if I got it wrong. This is just Stokes' law. What I did was I assumed the density of the particles, that's water basically, I made them a bit denser there. And then I analysed the falling time in still air, 2 meters to fall 2 meters. And what you see is that once you get less than bigger than 10 microns, they fall out of the air pretty quickly. 10 micron, about 10 minutes, somewhere of that order of magnitude in still air. But if they're down at less than 5 microns, it's hours to fall out of the air. And they can be transported long distances. What's more, when you actually, our particle counts were in micrograms. So we worked out how many micrograms of particles of this size it took. And it was millions of the things, right? There's a lot more of them, those smaller particles in the air of that size. So in other words, the other particles are falling out. So when you sample for it, you're getting the ones that are sticking around. And they're the ones that are potentially going to be breathed in. And there are many more of those. So if we look here, this is Basu's work, looking at the upper respiratory tract and down in the pulmonary tract. Many of you will probably be aware of this. He found that, or she found, I don't know whether it is a he or she, but they found that it was 90% of the particles that impacted, virions that impacted in the nasopharynx were in the 2.5 to 20 micron range. And then the smaller range from 1 to 5, they started to go deeper into the lungs. Again, another point that Stephanie was saying, and that made me wonder about whether you get more virulent disease in that situation. But what it tells us, obviously, is that when in that 1 to 10 PM, 1 to 10 range is where these viral particles that are likely to cause infection are, right, at that point. Now, I think time is, are we okay for time? Just
one more, 2 minutes.
Yeah, right. So we're getting close to the end here. So this is a huge debate, which at the beginning of the pandemic, the idea of droplets and ballistic droplets and droplet nuclei and everything. And basically it's rubbish because there's a continuum, right? So basically the big droplets that are greater than 100 microns, they'll fall to the ground ballistically within, say, 2 meters or so, right? But all the ones larger than that will evaporate very rapidly, and up to 85% of the particles are in that range. And in fact, at the beginning of the pandemic, I did a preprint, which where I actually looked at various studies, some of Lydia's work and there are others, and actually looked at the distributions, all the data I could find. It's really meta-analysis. And I found that when talking 45% to 75%, would eventually end up in that less than 10 micron end, after evaporation. Similarly with coughing, it was about 56 to 84%. So in other words, an awful lot of the stuff that we're breathing out here will evaporate and end up in that small micron end, which is where we were sensing, and can move around the ward space. And of course, others have done studies here. This is Alsved's study, and you see the number of particles in these ranges for various activities, and they are mind-blowing. There's a lot of particles out there, so no wonder this disease is transmitted. And then we've already seen this, I think, we've seen this earlier on, this Lednicki paper. It's a bit out of date now, but it showed quite clearly that the particles were moving more than 2 meters, which is exactly what we have found. So what can we say from this? It's a limited study, it's only 2 days, but it's physics, it's a time series study. It took me months to write these 2 days up. The person who collected the data said, yeah, here's the data. And I said, well, that's taken you 2 days of data, and it's months to write it up and do the analysis. What we can say with absolute category is that aerosols are being liberated in this range due to human activity on those wards. The particulates in this range are likely to carry a substantial number of respiratory aerosols and possibly bacterial aerosols, especially when the ward space is busy. These aerosol particles are freely migrating around the ward space. Social distancing alone is unlikely to stop these aerosols moving around the ward space. I think we've heard that one today already. As an intervention, the air filtration unit it greatly reduced the levels of particulates in the space. So we can only surmise from that it will reduce the amount of virulence in the space, viral particles and bacterial particles if they're disseminated into the air. And I hope very soon that we will have a study published which will show the clinical epidemiological evidence to back up this over the year. So that's my talk, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for an informative talk.